When I was about 7 or 8 years old, probably one of my favorite things to do whenever I got home from school was play the SSX games, specifically SSX Tricky. Now, unfortunately, the SSX games aren't nearly as popular as they were back in the day, nor are there many as talks of a new game coming out. The last we ever heard of the SSX series was in 2012 when SSX came out. No, not the one you're thinking of. That one. Unfortunately, ever since the release of that game, we haven't really heard anything about what the future of SSX entails. And in honor of the game's 20th anniversary, I thought I would take a look at SSX Tricky. SSX Tricky was the second game in the SSX series that was developed by the now-defunct branch of Electronic Arts known as EA Sports Big, which is honestly depressing because Big was probably the only good branch of EA to ever exist. The game is considered by many to be the best snowboarding game of all time, so from the sounds of things, I'm not gonna really have much trouble when it comes to reviewing it. Besides, I played this game far too many hours growing up as a child, and I can safely confirm that all of those statements are fairly accurate and that Tricky is actually really good in what it wants to be. And what it wants to be is a bloody good snowboarding game. It's kinda crazy looking back on the SSX series through modern lenses, as the series is rarely talked about nowadays, with the last game in the series being released in 2012. It's crazy to think that SSX is now basically dead, but we can now look back on the games like SSX Free and Tricky and remember the good times they brought with them. When you get down to the gameplay of SSX Tricky, it's not really that complex as far as most snowboarding and skateboarding games are nowadays. The goal of the game is simple: race from the top of the track all the way to the bottom while listening to the announcer yell in your brain the whole way down. But you'd be surprised at how much depth they put into this game, and that's why it's so goddamn fun. The game focuses on the tricks, and holy shit aren't these the coolest tricks you've ever seen. It's like I'm watching a goddamn Cirque du Soleil show in here. The biggest feature and gimmick of SSX Tricky is the tricks themselves, and they're by far the best part of the game. They've been completely overhauled from the previous game and are much smoother than they originally were in the original SSX. Once you go airborne, if you hold any of the shoulder buttons, your character will do a standard trick, but you can also combine combinations of shoulder buttons and also add in flips in order to make it about 10 times as wacky as they already were. As if me flying about in what is basically a human pinball machine wasn't crazy enough for some reason. You can also grind on rails, and while it is far from the most reliable thing in the world, it's still a welcome gameplay element that makes the tricks all the more interesting. And at least it's not as bad as it was in the original SSX, because holy trying to grind a ramp in that game was almost impossible and resulted in me eating the snow. But then the Uber tricks happen, and once they happen, the game goes completely ape. Throughout all the races, by performing tricks, you can fill up the game's Tricky meter. You can also use the meter to give yourself a bit of a boost, but if you're smart, you'll wait until the meter is full. And when the meter is full, you'll be able to perform Uber tricks. Uber tricks are over-the-top dance fests that are clearly not possible in real life, and you would most likely result in you slamming your spinal column into the nearest tree upon attempt. But if you're able to land these tricks, one letter on the Tricky meter will turn red. If you're able to get the whole word of Tricky to glow up red, you'll get unlimited boost for the rest of the race, which is actually really clever as it actively rewards the player for doing tricks properly and being able to pull them off consistently enough to fill the meter. One problem with this though is that as soon as you fill up the meter, you basically don't have to do tricks for the rest of the race. Pretty much all you have to do is just race the whole way down the mountain. Now, admittedly, they would fix this in SSX Free by making it so once the meter is full, a few minutes later, it completely decreases, meaning that you have to fill it up again. But still, it's a problem here, and I'm not talking about SSX Free, so that's a different topic for a different day. Luckily, however, SSX Tricky has 10 elegantly designed tracks that are all memorable and unique in their own little way. Even the little details, like every track having its own logo, makes this game feel more lively and memorable than it would without it. The two most memorable tracks in this regard are probably Garibaldi and Tokyo Megaplex. Garibaldi takes place in broad daylight and has dozens of massive jumps and serves as the perfect starting level, while Tokyo Megaplex is the only track in the game that A, doesn't make any sense and is completely impossible in real life, and B, is the only track in the series to work on a lap system, which you would see in normal racing games. But remember, this is SSX, and this is not a normal racing game. In order to keep the track interesting because it's technically really short, you can finish a lap in a minute, they threw in ramps, jumps, rails, and tunnels, and alternating paths everywhere. You can probably race on this track about 100 times and still find new things to jump off of and new ways to maneuver around the environment. That and the fact this track looks like some form of snowboard-infused pinball machine makes it even more memorable. Literally, all the tracks are amazing in this regard, because all of them have their own unique look, style, and tons of different shortcuts to race through and discover. Even Mercury City, that has some of the most frustrating shortcuts I've ever seen in a game, is still fun to race on. All of the tracks are fun to race on in this aspect. All except for one. Now, I know I'm going to get a lot of shit for this, because I know a lot of people like this track, but I just don't think Aloha Ice Jam works into the flow of this type of game. Now, I have played the original SSX, and from what I can say, Aloha Ice Jam works a lot more in that game due to the simplified mechanics. But in this game, it just doesn't work whatsoever. The track is really thin and narrow and barely has any room to navigate smoothly around, resulting in you barely getting any opportunities to do uber tricks, or tricks in general, to be completely honest. Not just that, but the turns are so sharp that even with the highest turn rate character, you can just barely make it around some corners. And also, just don't try to use an alpine board, because with how sharp the corners are, if you land the wrong way around, yeah, you're gonna slam straight into a post, and it's not gonna be a good time. Despite that, however, it's actually still a decent track, and not one I would necessarily call bad, but it is a little bit of a blemish on the game. Still not bad, but not good either. It's middle of the road, if I'm being completely honest. Now that we've got the gameplay covered and the tracks covered, let's talk about the characters you'll be racing as in SSX Tricky. The game has 12 of them, and they all have their own unique personalities and tricks that you can perform. My personal favorites are Mac, who is basically the face of the series, Simon, who is a flaming lunatic and gets a high out of jumping off things, Moby, who is unironically British and happens to be my brother's favorite. James, I swear to God, if you pick Moby one more time and personally shove me down at the start of the race, I'm going to fuck. And JP, who is a complete douchebag, and I love him for it. All of these characters have lovely and memorable personalities, and make you feel more involved in this wacky world that they are boarding through, which is to be applauded. Seriously though, this is one of the most important parts of the game, and I don't think people really realize it as it's going on. I mean, just think about it. Imagine if you had all these crazy tracks and landscapes and tricks, but the characters were just generic borders akin to what you'd see in real life. Or imagine the vice versa, for instance. It just wouldn't be that unique of a game. But because the tricks, the tracks, and the characters all line up with being so wacky and out there that it's just not possible in real life, it just works so much more. As for what there is to do in the game outside of the races, there's a mode called World Circuits. In this mode, you pick one character and play across all the tracks in the game. These activities include standard races and a mode called Show Off. Races are simple enough, just get to the finish line before anyone else and glock anybody else you see on the way down. The show-off events, however, are an entirely different beast. This mode is where the game truly shines, and this is where gets really fun really fast. In this mode, you have to perform as many tricks as humanly possible and get enough points to earn a gold medal. However, there are now hidden snowflakes around the track that give you point multipliers on the current trick you're performing. There are also extra grind rails and ramps that aren't there in the normal game, and this opens up tracks in ways that God never intended. The mode is basically what it says on the tin: show everyone you're the best and don't eat snow on the way down. Dude, what did I just say? However, I do have a problem with the racing part of the World Circuit mode. You see, in order to pass a stage, you need to first qualify for the finals and earn first place. In order to do that, you must race on each track 3 separate times and place in the top 3 every time. Along with playing the track in Show Off, you're going to be playing each track 4 times in order to progress, which means you'll be racing 32 times across 8 tracks. And by the way, that's per character if you want to unlock everything. So have fun unlocking all the boards and costumes because you're gonna suffocate with all that padding. Now let's talk about the main thing that people don't really seem to talk about with this game, and that's the fact that this game is technically SSX 1.5, and not an entirely new game. You see, bar from Garibaldi in Alaska, every single track from the original SSX has been carried over, albeit with some minor changes. And then there's Tokyo Megaplex, which just straight up changed its entire layout, and also Pipe Dream. Like, you can kind of see where some of the other tracks look the same, but then there's just these two in particular that just decided, F it, I'm going through puberty, and then bang. Like, seriously, do these even look like the same track? Tell me, be completely honest with me right now. That's exactly what I thought. Now, I want to make this clear. I've played the original SSX, and while that game is good, it's stiffer to control than dragging a log through a pit of cement, and besides that, the game was in dire need of a serious fix. So, being the primordial godsend that it always has been, Tricky swooped in and improved on literally everything in the first game. It's so good that there is basically no point in buying the first game anymore, unless you're more a fan of the simplistic gameplay the original offered. Now, personally, I don't have a problem with this, as Tricky was where I started, so for those who plan on buying their first SSX game, buy Tricky, because Tricky is just SSX, but better in practically every single way. As for my final thoughts on the game, it's simply incredible that 20 years after it originally came out, the game is still as fun as ever and can capture my attention as quickly as it did when I was 5. If you own a PS2, Xbox, or GameCube, buy this game and let the game do the rest. Its over-the-top antics, insane tricks, wacky characters, and amazing track designs will keep you entertained for days on end.